Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt.
With me today is life coach and LOA teacher Joel Elston.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today.
Joel, after visiting with Dr. Ken Martz last week, which is kind of unusual, we normally don't do guests here. We're back to you and me, which feels very familiar. But I have to say, I enjoyed the visit last week. And I mean, that was the second time that he's visited, but we had a good synergy going on there with the three of us.
That was an excellent show. All of our shows I love. That one had a particularly good energy. It's also an anniversary show, a significant number. And I had several comments from people who had watched the show or listened to the show and just noted what an incredible energy we had that night, the synergy, and several people, and I don't remember us being that funny, but a lot of people said we were hilarious. So
we were kind of funny.
Yeah.
There was something about that conversation last week. I mean, the one-liners were just waiting to be had, hanging like low fruit on a tree.
So that was good, but that was a spectacular show. And Ken is not only a dear friend, but he truly is one of a kind therapist that gets sort of really understands law of attraction and traditional psychology and melds it in almost in a perfect way.
Yeah, he does it really, really well. I mean,
yes.
I can see why, in the earlier years you would lean on him for information because, boy, he'd be a fount of like good, solid advice,
absolutely.
Information, insight.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, absolutely.
We'll have to have him back again a third time, which won't be very difficult.
Well, yeah, I would like to see him on, as often as he can, but, once a month, once every other month, it'd be great.
Yeah. So we'll aim toward that. Meanwhile, as you sent me an email earlier today saying I don't see a link for the StreamYard, and I said, oh yeah, I haven't put that together, and then I put it together and I realized I didn't have a topic. So we really are starting off with a blank topic today. So I'm just going to kind of reach out for something, and I'm going to start with the challenges that are involved in dealing with loved ones. You personally know why I'm saying this because we had a conversation before we got going, but literally this is something that everybody deals with on a regular basis. Anybody who has a relative, somebody that they're close to, challenges occur no matter how good the relationship is. And the real question is twofold. First, how do we handle it? And second of all, how do we handle the stuff that doesn't work out the way we want it to work out?
Well, when we're dealing, and I have a spin from my view of this, a lot of my work is with addiction and family members of addicts as well as the addicts themselves. And I literally was on a call earlier today with a lady whose son is away at college. He's a compulsive gambler, and he's in the middle of a downward spiral, and he is creating constant, debt. He's borrowing money that he can't afford to pay back, and he's doing some illegal activity to get money, getting credit card money that he shouldn't be getting. And they're trying to put out the fire, and they keep every fire they put out is just another one lights up. And so it's really hard for them to, how they keep saying, how does this come to an end? What's going to make him stop? And I said, unfortunately, this is his journey. And every time you bail him out, I know this sounds harsh, but you are allowing it to continue. It's not your fault. And I understand the perception of being able to help, but allowing him to feel consequences is what makes most people want to stop addiction. And that is a really hard pill to swallow when you're dealing with somebody you love, to do anything to seemingly participate in their pain. So when your son or daughter calls and they say, look, I'm in desperate need, I need money, and the instinct is I will help you with money, but please don't do that again. And this cycle repeats 18, 20 times, and now you're looking at $80,000 or $90,000 that you don't have that is gone. You have to accept that that's not a path that's working. So, being able to have that conversation when you have the courage to say, I'm going to let you live your experiences and the associated consequences. That's a really hard thing to say. It really is.
Yeah. Oh,
because
absolutely.
and the consequences can be dire and some, legal consequences. I can speak for that experience. And she said, well, Joel, she said, I also am fearful that this is too much for him to handle and he'll kill himself. And I go, I would love to tell you that isn't a risk, but I can't. These are very hard things to do, but there's no action you can take to force him. He's the only person that has the solution to this. He just doesn't know it yet. And so supporting his journey in a way that he realizes, I got to go through what I got to go through. And so dealing with family members, that's not exactly what we're talking about, but that's sort of the perspective that I deal with. Is it's hard to watch people you care about struggle, and also realize sometimes struggle is the point of why we're here to become the people we need to be. And
Yeah.
It's hard. It's really hard.
It's very hard. It also isn't really off topic, because the topic that I'm raising here is, what is it like to deal with loved ones for good or for ill, and particularly when they're going through something rough, or you're having to interact with them on something rough. It is a challenge, especially, this is what you're describing here, especially in a case where you acting out of love would actually enable a behavior in them that is counterproductive. That's, in this case, in the instance that you just described, the parent isn't really doing anything that on the surface sounds like any kind of enabling. They're just being a parent. Like, I want to help my kid out. Right. And yet through that helping the kid out, they're actually enabling a behavior that they would never consciously choose to say, yes, I want my kid to do that. Sure. That's what they call being between a rock and a hard place. No matter what direction you move in, there's no winning move.
I know a grandmother, at the time, 65-year-old grandmother. Her 18-year-old grandson was living with her, and he was addicted to heroin. And anyone who has ever witnessed a human being go through heroin withdrawal, there's really not anything worse you can witness. It is brutal. It won't kill you, even though you're convinced you're dying the entire time. Yeah. It is a brutal thing to watch. So she watched his pain and was convinced. He convinced her that he had to have a little bit of heroin. And she just said, no, I'm going to call the ambulance, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. And he's like, no, I'm going to stop, but you need to get me a little heroin. So here the 65-year-old grandmother goes to a part of town where she can buy some heroin. And in the middle of the night, and I'm not laughing, but the sight of this in her little Toyota Camry, 10:30 at night in a really rough part of town, is meeting this drug dealer. And this police officer just realizes, why is this woman here? She was so out of place. And so he watched, and as the man approached, the police officer intercepted, and the drug dealer ran off, and she was desperate. She said, my son is dying, grandson is dying, and I have to get him his medicine. And those were the words she was using. And the police officer was like, ma'am, you're putting, not only you're committing a crime, he said, but I'm not remotely interested in that. I'm worried about your safety. And what if you got some heroin that contains some fentanyl, and you go give this quote unquote medicine to your grandson and kill him? And it was this awakening moment that she had to, the police officer, very kind, goes back to the house with her and basically tells the kid, he says, look, you're going to go through this. I can take you to the hospital. I can call an ambulance so they can help you with medications that'll help alleviate this. But you're not getting heroin, and your grandmother's not going to buy you heroin. But to her, it seemed logical to stop my grandson's suffering. I'm going to go buy heroin for the first time in her life.
Right.
That's how strong that entered. We don't want to see our children or our family or any loved one suffer, but not knowing that the suffering consequence of heroin addiction is generally the catalyst of recovery. It generally is.
Yeah, and that's harsh. It is clearly the route to getting out of it, but there's no other word for it. It's harsh. Harsh.
And that's, so I deal with this a lot in family members that they'll use the word enable. And so this family earlier today, they said, well, he's in the middle of school and his grades are reasonable, and he's someone that's probably going to need this is the gambler. He's probably going to need some residential treatment because he's so bad. He has to be pulled out of his environment.
Mm-hmm.
And so the mom says, well, we're going to just pay this time, but tell him any more, the next time he's going to treatment. And I go, okay, I'm fine with that. And she goes, well, you think it'll work? And I go, no, there's no chance of it working. It's just the reason I'm agreeing to it is not for him. It's for you. You need to see that he can't stop. And maybe that will convince you, because he's going to tell you, yes, I'll stop if you pay this off. And then in a month from now, we'll have the same conversation, and then he'll be going to treatment.
That's really, that's not, talk about conversations that are not fun to have. That's a conversation that's not fun to have, the one that you had with the parents.
Yeah. Yeah. And I explained, I said, I love this kid. He's a great kid. It's not me attacking the kid. If I had any other way for him to do this, I would suggest that. But I know what to be so young and have such a deep gambling addiction when you're in your early 20s. I know from experience,
sure.
he isn't going to stop, and he's got a ways to go. So there's a lot they have to do, and they're accepting it in the time they can accept it. So, but when you're dealing with it, it's watching others suffer, particularly people you love or care about, has to be one of the hardest things as humans we do.
Yeah. Yeah. Now there's also another tack that we can take here, another track, which is dealing with people that we love, but for various possible reasons, the people we love hurt us. And so now we're dealing with a cycle of our own pain in regard to that person, which
Sure.
it basically falls into the same category, but in the experience of it, it's an entirely different animal.
Sure. Well, and that's the other thing when you get a mesh and you love, loving someone, and those people cause you pain, but yet having to revisit when they have pain or whatever scenario comes up, it becomes a very complicated process. And you can love somebody and know they're not good for you. You can love someone and be away from them and know you're better off without them. And all that's real, but it's a very complicated emotional thing we go through. It's one of the hardest things as humans to accept. I really love this person, but this person is really bad for me.
It's obviously a conversation where boundaries come into the fray, if you will, and fray is often a good word for it. And we just had a conversation on the show within the last few episodes. I don't remember which episode it was, but I remember we had an expert. I think it was actually 2 episodes ago. We had an expert on who's written a book about boundaries and in-depth knowledge of it and so forth. Really interesting. And in the course of that conversation, we realized just how dynamic boundaries really are. There's no such thing as a static boundary. There's no such thing as a boundary that, we will always follow this rule. Nobody ever does that. Everybody has, sometimes it's called gray area, sometimes it's called a dynamic boundary, a moving boundary, and so forth. But however you decide to label it, everyone has boundaries that shift from moment to moment. That alone can be confusing. Just because a boundary is supposed to be, thou shalt, come this far and no further, except that's not true.
Well, and boundaries in clinical terms or using psychological, descriptives, boundaries, for the most part, as you're saying, they're artificial. They're put in place for protection, but they're almost always bendable. They're almost always movable. A lot of times boundaries are put into place in the heat of the moment. And so here's an example of sort of a funny boundary that I years ago when my oldest son, TJ, and he was my wild child, and he came home one night and he had with this cop. He was in the backseat of a police car, and he was skateboarding, and the cop found pot on him. And so the police officer brought him back, and my ego, because I was a director of a residential treatment program for addiction, and my son and the cop knew me. So my ego was, to be honest with you, was more damaged than anything here. And I was furious with TJ. I was like, you're on restriction for 2 months and, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And so I set this ridiculous boundary out of pure anger. And after about 30 minutes, I'm like, okay, let's look at this in the big scheme of things. You know what I mean? And, because first of all, he was like 14 at the time. So you put a 14-year-old on restriction, you're putting yourself on restriction because you have to sit around to make sure to stay on restriction. So I went back and I said, the pot thing's ridiculous, son. Really, we're not going to do that. You're not going to have that here. And we're, forget the restriction. I simply don't want, do we understand each other? That's not acceptable. I don't believe it. And we had a great conversation, ended up having a really good therapeutic moment. But the boundary that I laid, the mindset when you put a boundary down determines really how enforceable it is, how reasonable it is. So boundaries not only are often, very movable, but they're also based on the mindset when you make it, because you wake up the next day feeling differently, and that boundary looks ridiculous.
Yeah. So if you're finding yourself in a situation where you're trying to establish a new boundary, and you heard this podcast where Joel told this rather semi-amusing story about how he had to shift his own boundary that he had set. Okay, now I'm going to set this boundary. How do I go about setting it? I mean, do I just go ahead and go overboard and then pull it back tomorrow? Or do I try to change my mindset now? Or what do I do?
Well, I think every boundary has to be, I don't think a week goes by that I don't use the phrase perspective-based. So here we go here. But every boundary, again, needs to be perspective-based. How serious is the boundary? Is it boundaries? I need a boundary around chocolate. You know what I mean? Like that chocolate needs a boundary. It is not allowed in my house. And the level of importance of that, really, you know what I mean? But there's no chocolate in my house, but if chocolate slips in my house, the end of the world's not there. So that boundary is not a big deal. However, when there's certain things that could kill you and you have problems with that, for people like that have heroin addiction or people that have addictions that you would threaten their lives, there needs to be some really significant boundaries that are placed there to be, because they're life and death. So you have to almost define what is the boundary protecting, the importance of the boundary. And it's almost always important for me, because anytime I'm helping someone set boundaries, the boundaries needs to be set whenever possible in a non-emotional state. It needs to be set in a logical state. I'm setting this boundary because of, and I want to do this, and why am I doing it? Not because of my emotions at the time, because the emotions are constantly fluctuating. That's why boundaries often fluctuate, because most boundaries, if you think about it, are set in emotional states. So they're always going to be fluctuating. Whereas, what?
I was just going to say, so we could say that step number one is take a breath.
Take a deep breath, step back, and number one, is the boundary necessary? Number two, what is the point of the boundary? And almost do a step-by-step checklist of the boundary, of why you're doing it. And then rate the importance of it in your mind. This is life or death, so that boundary needs to be as firm as humanly possible. I do not need, for 10 years, and actually it's been for over 30 years, almost 30 years now, but I had a hardcore, I will not go to Las Vegas. Not negotiable. You couldn't pay me money to go to Las Vegas. It was too much, that almost killed me.
Sure.
Well, as time goes on, I'm not going to go to Las Vegas. I have no desire to go to Las Vegas, but I could go to Las Vegas now. So that boundary is loosely in place, and I'm not going to go. But there was a time when that boundary was necessary. So boundaries can be adjusted as time goes on, as situations change. But if you have an abusive, one of my clients was in an abusive relationship, very violent man, and he was put in jail. And when he got out, she had to be reminded there's a restraining order in place. He's not allowed here. If he shows up, the police are called. That's a boundary that could cost you your life.
Yeah.
So you have to keep that boundary in place.
Yeah. So I guess another question that comes to my mind based on what you just said is, to me, there's a great deal of overlap between the idea of a boundary and the idea of an intention.
Yeah.
And we use intention as a word to describe, typically, especially in LOA circles, we just use it to describe things that we're trying to attract into our lives, things that we desire. But an intention can also be tied to something we desire to avoid pain on. That can be the desire as well. So I guess my first question is, do you think that intention and boundaries are really almost the same thing, or what are the similarities and differences?
Well, a lot of it is semantics and really from where you're approaching it. So I agree that for a law of attraction concept, intentions can be boundaries. They can have the same power of boundaries. But in general, when you're speaking about people who really are familiar with the concepts of law of attraction, I think intentions are sort of this is my goals, here's my intention, here's what I want to be trying to do. Boundaries are brought to the table when you need more definite enforcement than intentions. Intentions, these are my goals for most people. And if I don't necessarily get them, that's okay. But a boundary is, I have to be these are more restrictive intentions. That's sort of my interpretation for the general public. But in general, for us, law of attraction people, I think they're identical. But
that's really interesting.
Yeah. Because if you think about it, an intention for us is, because we all know the law of attraction responds in a horrible way to overthinking it or over wanting it. So intentions, boundaries in law of attraction almost have a reverse effect, because it's sort of, and I don't want to get into because we're talking about really two different things here, but intentions in general allow for, here's what needs to be happening. Here's what I'm attracting in my life. And I'm going to move on from that. Where boundaries require enforcement, it needs to be forefront of your mind. These are boundaries.
And interesting too that you described how in law of attraction circles the two really are equivalent, and I think they are, largely because one of the things that we who are practitioners want to do is to develop the skill of making our intentions as strong as a boundary.
I'll even go further for people that really are into the process. Intentions are stronger than boundaries because you don't need to focus on them so hard. Intentions are, you put an intention out there, you expect it to be fulfilled, and then you move on. It's just automatically in place. Where boundaries require boundary setting, and you can say intention setting as well, but you to get to the level of understanding where the law of attraction really applies, the stuff you want too much is the stuff you'll never get in law of attraction. You understand that? So for us, we're coming at it from the different. I just feel intentions are more powerful because I understand how to use intentions now. Intentions are light. I set that, I move on from them, and I expect them to be fulfilled. Period. There's no effort required there. And we're talking a lot of overlapping things too, because when it comes to real life stuff, if you have if your daughter is being threatened by somebody who's beat her up and needs a restraining order, I'm not worried about semantics here. You need firm boundaries and legal protection in place to protect her, not negotiable. Let's not even look at the two. That's two different things. But when you're talking about lesser type things, the reason boundaries are so hard to enforce is sort of like you're saying, because you don't know your mood tomorrow. You know how many times I'll hear from my younger clients, it doesn't matter male or female, but let's use some female. Well, when I leave here, I'm breaking up with my boyfriend. He's not good for me. I want to set a boundary that he can't do this anymore. And then I get a picture of some flowers he gave her. Oh, he's so sweet. And it's like, it's very, boundaries can be very dependent on the mood of the moment of what's going on. Or boundaries can be, just something that you can teach people how to treat you when people are abusive to you emotionally. And that can be a very broad term, by the way. People can be harmful to you. People could have done great damage to you. You can still love that person. But I also, here's an example. If someone betrays your trust horribly and they totally wipe you out, it almost costs you your sanity. And they do that. I've had experiences like that. You probably have had experiences like that when you've been betrayed or whatever. And So I know for me that I never want that to happen again. So if a person has the ability to do that once, I'm going to just go out on a limb and say they have the ability to do that twice. Even if
Mm,
I'm desperately in love with them, I know that person has the ability to almost destroy me, which they almost did. So I'm going to put a boundary in place for my best interest to not, let's just not go down that road again because I don't want to fall for that again. So sometimes you can put those in place, even if there's still love there, even if it's just, that person is not good for you, even though there's parts of that person that really seem to match real well. But the cost of what could happen for me is too much sometimes. So there are people, very few people, but I probably have 4 or 5 people that there's boundaries in place just because of the damage and stuff that I'm just not
mm,
going to back away from.
right. Yeah. There's an
And I
old
forgive them.
cliche. There's a cliche that brings to mind that I actually have rephrased it from the original. The way I've rephrased it is, fool me once, that's on you. Fool me twice, that's on me.
Yeah.
It's kind of a
Yeah.
way of reminding myself that if I find myself being deceived or misled or in some way, unfairly or disadvantagedly, taken advantage. In some way, they harmed me, they hurt me, they took advantage, they did something like that. The first time I could be caught by surprise. It could be like, oh wow, I didn't really expect that. And wow, that really hurt, or that was really frustrating, or, whatever the result is. But the cliche reminds me of, well, if they, like you said, if they've done it once, they can do it again. What's to stop them? And that to me is a really big question, because when you look at it honestly, you realize there's nothing to stop. The only thing that was there to stop them before was their own unwillingness to do it. Once they've demonstrated the willingness to do it, that's gone.
We see this, and I have actually have a few friends this applies to, but I'm thinking of one in particular. He's a very wealthy man, and about 4 years ago, he met this lady at a conference. Now he was married at the time to the mother of his children, and so he met this lady at a conference. She was also married, so she started talking to him, and one thing led to another. Over a period of time, they quote unquote, fell into love. She divorced her husband. He ended up divorcing his wife, and they eventually got together. And not judging, that's their business. Everybody's grown here, do what you got to do. So he's still my friend. So I get a call, I don't know, 6, 7 months ago. He said, "You're going to be so shocked, Joel." Let's call the girl Mary. It's not her name. Let's say Mary. Mary cheated on me.
Okay.
And I'm going, "Oh, shocking." And he goes, "Are you being sarcastic?" And I go, "Of course I'm being sarcastic." It isn't like there's how could you not have that is the highest possibility that's going to happen?
Yeah.
I mean, just to be fair, that's you can't be shocked. It's the opposite of shocked. You should have gone, "Oh, check," and just be there. And he sort of said, "Well, yeah," and he got it. But we go through these things, and people generally they don't change behavior drastically. And so if people can, and that's sort of a funny one, and it's funny for him now because he realizes the ludicrous nature of it all.
Right. Right.
But the process that people tend to just keep repeating behaviors and cycle, and then the funny thing is the shocking piece is how can you be shocked when people repeat cycles? That's the thing. That from my perspective in life, I'm shocked that you're shocked. I'm far more shocked that you're shocked that she cheated than actually being shocked. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
that's just what you almost expect.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you aren't expecting it, then why?
Yeah. Then why?
What's,
I mean,
what's making you decide that?
Yeah. Well, there's always that internal thing that somehow, well, this doesn't apply here, or because you love somebody and
Mm.
loves this, and I'm not doubting that he loved this woman and she
Sure.
loved him. I'm not doubting that, but you got to look at there's more to it than that. There's also this need to. A lot of people are addicted to what I call new love, that passion love. So, that first love, like that really intense stuff, and
Right.
I want this one, and then after about 4 or 5 years, it's like, okay, we're past that. So a lot of people they mistakenly think they've fallen out of love, when in reality it's not falling out of love. The relationship has just transitioned to a different form of connection.
Exactly.
And so a lot of them are out there chasing what they think is love, which is that constant passionate stuff, and they always get stuck in that cycle. Humans tend to have cyclical thinking and behaviors, and to change a behavior that's sort of embedded in us is really hard to do. I mean, you can make incremental changes, and there's obviously some people make some drastic changes, but it's really hard to wash out certain behaviors because they're built over a lifetime. And so just being aware that when people hurt you or betray you, and I'm one of these people that, because of just some of the dysfunctional lifestyle I had, and all the stuff, I don't trust many people. I'm a very slow person to trust. I have people that I let in, and there's a few people. By the time you get to the people that are all the way in, there's very few of those.
Yeah.
And because just because I'm going to protect that piece, and so one of my biggest fears is somebody in that inner circle betrays me. That's just scary to me. And I'm protected against that. I'm not saying that's the most healthy thing for me either. I'm just saying that's who I am. So I'm a long way before somebody can get through all those things.
Not that it doesn't even mean that it can't happen either. I mean, obviously, it could happen at any time, right?
Yeah. But and I have people, that I trust implicitly with everything, and I will, just because they've earned that, and so it isn't like it's impossible to do, but it's just understanding how our brain operates. Everything usually is a protective mechanism that's going on in us. While we all want to be loved, we all want to be happy, we all want to have these things, we also have this protective mechanism about being hurt. And it sometimes those things are not congruent, and you can love people that hurt you, and that's a really hard place to be in.
It is. It's a very hard place to be in. There's also another piece that goes along with that. And maybe this brings us back full circle to what we started the conversation about, which is, let's say that, hypothetically, one of those people who are in one's inner circle, like you were describing, you described the very few people in your inner circle, and one of them does betray us. Now we have to figure out how to handle it. Now we have to deal with it in some way. Yeah. And that's probably the time when it's least within our power, because we're just so emotionally wrought by what happened. That's where the biggest challenges happen. I mean, there are plenty of big challenges. Don't get me wrong. There are all kinds of big challenges that go on. But in terms of moment by moment, that's probably the biggest one, because that's what happened to me when my marriage ended. You remember that. I mean, that was actually about a year ago. I called you the day after it happened, and I was in such deep shock. Literally, I couldn't process anything.
Right.
I mean,
I remember
I was trying to make decisions, which was probably the craziest thing to do, but I was trying to make decisions in that state.
And I was saying, let's take a deep breath.
Yeah.
You're not going to figure this out today. You're not going to keep repeating the conversation over and over. Just take a deep breath, sit with it, and then we'll get to it. And you did. Yeah. You did a good job, but it was horrible for you early.
It is. It's very horrible. Yeah. But even more so, you feel like you need to do something.
Yes.
There's like this impetus that's built in that says, well, I mean, I can do things. I can get something done here. What is it?
Yes.
All I have to do is know what it is I have to get done. That's it. That's my whole thing. I just have to find out what it is, except there's nothing to do.
There's nothing to do. And when you really realize that there's not anything you can do on those scenarios, it is incredibly, you feel powerless. You feel, you feel like, wow, this is, what is wrong with me? Why can't I come up with a solution to this? And, like the situation that you're describing, or other situations, I don't want to speak directly in your situations, but a lot of times it's not your fault at all. I'm not saying we don't participate in things.
Yeah, sure.
But what can I do to fix it? Well, you can't fix it. She's gone. She left. She's, there's not a magical combination of words you're going to say to say, oh, I made a mistake. Well, turn around the car. Yeah.
Now that would have been a shock.
Yeah, that would have been a shock. But I'm not making light of your situation. I'm saying that is, that, you know.
Well, actually, you are making light of the situation, but I'm perfectly okay with it because I'm making light of it too. So it works out okay.
Yeah. But we do have that, you know, one of the things that, you know, when I have the few times that somebody that made it in the inner circle betrayed me, that very few times, like maybe once or twice. The one thing that I had to develop over my lifetime in dealing with all the stuff I'm dealing with, I can pretty much take a moment. I'm not saying I do this instantly, but I am really capable of shutting that down quickly. I can isolate and move that quickly away, remove it, learn what I did wrong, and you know, a million apologies. I'll forgive you, but there's no re-entry into the inner circle. There's no that you get in there. If you ever get out, doesn't mean you can't be in my orbit, but you can never be right there again, ever. Period.
Yeah. And that's, again, there's a harshness to that, but it ties in directly to what you talked about a moment ago, which was that self-protectiveness.
Yes.
And it's something everybody needs, that self-protectiveness. That's
part.
You can't really be a healthy ego without it.
Well, that's true. And some of the things I do, and I also, again, I have a unique experience in life. You know how I deal with things, how I view things. So I'll often tell people what I describe may not always be the best thing for you. I'm saying this is what works for me. You know, so I don't judge anybody how they deal with their own individual path or their own individual journey. You know, it's something that none of us are, there's no blueprint for this. There's no guaranteed, here's what you're supposed to do in these scenarios. You have to be able to deal with it and, you know, what matches where you're at. But I always encourage people no matter what you're going through, the possibility of not even possibility. You can't see it when you're in the middle, but every one of these things that happen will have a response or a consequence to it. The consequence could be really good. It could be really bad. But there's going to be an event. So anytime that's one of these signaling events, there's change. There's a change about to take place. So what you want to do when you found out the information that your ex-wife is leaving or had left, you knew there's consequences quickly coming to that.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the part you didn't know is how this was going to play out.
Right.
You had no idea. But you knew things were drastically different from that moment forward. And so we try to grasp and hold on to what was when it was already gone. And it's a form of mourning. You know, when I found out, the morning I found out my son passed away, I couldn't accept that for a little bit. I logically understood what happened.
Sure.
But to truly accept his presence his physical presence was no longer on this earth it just didn't compute for a while.
Yeah.
And, you know, and then I had to, you know, eventually I was able to do that. So there's a period of shock. There's a period of, you know, whatever that goes on with that. We're just human beings. We're figuring this out. But I always believe that when you can pause, when you can take a moment, when you can allow things, even the bad things, because one of the things I knew when, I think I shared this with you, when TJ did pass away, and, you know, I have a lot of friends who are doctors. When word leaked out, you know, I had a really good friend said, look, I'll bring you, do you want some Xanax? Do you want something to help with this? I'll give you whatever you want. And I instinctively said, I need to feel this. I need to feel this. And I didn't want to medicate away from that.
Yeah.
Now, the feeling was ungodly bad, but in my mind, to honor, I don't know why, but I was not going to medicate away from the pain. And I sat with that pain for several days.
I know the feeling. Yeah. I mean, obviously my situation was different, but
no,
there was
I
still plenty
told
of pain.
you, so there's, and believe it or not, it's hard to explain that. Sometimes sitting with the pain has great value too.
Yeah. You don't feel it in the moment. In that moment, it doesn't seem to have any value.
No,
You have to have that perspective that comes after time. You've been through a
Yeah.
significant part of the journey. You can look back and say, oh, well, I guess I really did get something out of it.
Yeah.
But that takes a while.
Oh yeah, no, that's not instantaneous. But again, your perspective looking backwards dictates a lot of how things are. So when things are happening in the moment, you don't always see them as you will see them a year from now or 5 years from now or whatever. Anyway, so
Right.
A lot of it is understanding your perspective of an event can drastically change over time. And
that happened with me. I mean,
Yeah.
like I said, it's been a year since that event happened with Louise leaving, and I do look at it differently now.
Yeah.
Certainly, very differently from the way I did a year ago. I've actually gotten to the point now where I think it actually is probably working out better this way than if we were still together. If you had proposed that to me that day, I would have, if I survived the emotion, I would have just, I would have either punched you in the face or I would have, crashed to the ground or taken an overdose or something rather than buy into the idea that I was going to be better off. But I am.
Well, I instinctively knew that. Those aren't the words I'm going to say to you day one in the pain.
Yeah, sure.
I want you to. That's not a kind answer in the pain.
Right.
That's not what we need in the pain. But when you understand, I've known you a while now, and I see you happier today than I've ever seen you. I see you less anxious. I see you. I mean, you're a different man than we first met. And I'm not just saying
very.
the sole catalyst of her leaving, but I see a lot of growth in you since that in particular. So, I'm mean that in a really complimentary way to the work you've done. And this is not being mean toward her. I'm just saying you moving forward, you've grown a lot of ways. I mean, you have a renewed energy that didn't exist before this happened.
I agree with you. I think it's exactly accurate. And it's a little bit, I mean, there's certainly many shocks that occur along the way. The first one being the biggest one there, but there are shocks all along the way. They don't stop. It's not, it's kind of like an earthquake. There are aftershocks, right? It's not one and done. It just, the shocks keep on coming. But nevertheless, even as all of those shocks came along, perspective started to shift. I began to realize that there were certain things that I'm better off leaving behind. That the relationship did have a lot of good that happened for 20 plus years, but it had kind of run its course. And it was time for me to move on. I didn't know it at the time. I wasn't cognizant of it, but looking back, it's probably the best thing that happened.
Yeah. Well, that happens a lot of times with losing jobs or, other things where you can't see it until afterwards. I have hundreds of stories of people that were fired from their jobs and went on to much greater things, and would have never left the job if that event didn't happen. There's tons of those stories. And, I know people that found their true love after leaving the relationship they never would have left unless something like that would have happened. So, it's all of this is about that journey that we're talking about. And a lot of it is perspective based. This isn't exactly on point. But I'll tie it in in a second. So, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 months ago, I'm at the gym and it was a Saturday morning and there was this young man there and it was clear he had been through some kind of chemotherapy. His head was, he had no hair, very thin, very pale. And, his mom was helping him work out at the gym.
Okay.
And he was over the bar and he was laying under the bar on the bench press and he was doing it pretty well. And she's like, no, honey. He was like, Mom, I want to add some weight. I think I can do that. And so she's like, no, you're very weak. And, you, and so of course, me. So I walked over there and said, excuse me. I said, can I spot him? And she's like, oh yeah. Cause so I said, how much you weight on there, buddy? So he wanted 25 on each pound and 25 on each side. So I put it on him. He knocked it out pretty quick. I said, wow. I said, we need more weight. And she said, well, he's very weak. I don't know if he can do that. I go, first of all, he looks really strong to me. Look I don't know what he's been through. It was really strong to me. And, and so we changed the narrative a little bit. And I said,
Right.
I said, let him determine that path. And he's healed completely. He's in the gym. I see him all the time. He looks fantastic. He's in great shape. And the mom, a few months later, came up to me and goes, I needed you to do that because I wasn't going to let him do that, and he needed to do that. So when you shoved that weight on him, I was horrified. And then he said he left feeling so strong. And he said that mindset changed everything. So, she was in that event of I almost lost my son, and I don't want him to overdo it in the gym. Well, when the doctor says, hey, go back to the gym, you're good. And this kid's saying, I'm good. Let's go do it. He needed his body to grow. He needed those things to happen. So the cancer is never a good thing, but his recovery it makes him incredibly resilient. It makes it come back. So the tying together of watching family members struggle and then almost even being too protective almost applies to that same thing in a reverse way of not allowing them to grow, not allowing them to go through that other part. It has many facets to it as well.
It does. And I suppose it was only a matter of time before the word journey entered the conversation, because that ultimately is what we're talking about, the individual journeys that we are all on while all these crazy things are happening in this world of polarity and contrast, where you never know what's going to hit from around the corner next time. But the one big thing that I've been learning the most from just doing this show, talking to so many people like you, is so many great perspectives. Boy, I love those perspectives. Is the value of how you decide you're going to respond each time one of those crazy things happens, because we're doing these things. We're on this journey or these journeys, and on the journey we encounter these terrible things that happen. And now the question is, how are we going to handle it? How are we going to respond? I think most of us, without any kind of insight or training, we just kind of respond kind of like the way the infant responds, crying in pain, so to speak.
Right.
But the lessons that I've been learning through doing this show and talking to so many great people is we can change that. We can actually produce a different response, and in so doing, produce a different set of results after that response. And that's actually both mind-boggling and empowering in ways that I wouldn't have expected.
Well, and with those responses, you have a new sort of outlook. You develop this. So this is I almost wasn't going to mention this, but because it's no big deal. I have a very minor surgical procedure coming up toward the end of the month. It's very minor. But I'm going to have to go under for that. So they wanted to do a pre-op physical for me, and I'm in great shape. Well, and I always tell them, I said, when you're going to do an ECG on me, I have done powerlifting my entire life. So I have an enlarged athletic heart. It's not a bad heart. It's not enlarged due to deficiency. It's enlarged due to it's a grown muscle, right? So, of course, the technician does it and is like, oh, my gosh, you got an enlarged heart. I go, yes, I do. Thank you.
We did have this conversation a moment ago, didn't we? I'm pretty sure we did.
Yeah, she was, but it's real. It's like it's enlarged. I told you it would be. So one of the other things that happens is when you do powerlifting, and particularly, so that morning, I had no idea they were going to do blood work for this pre-ops thing. So I did a heavy set of squats and deadlifts. So one of the things, there's enzymes that's, when you damage a muscle, there's an enzyme that's released into the blood, okay? Normal from working out. Well, they're the same enzymes that show up when you have slight liver damage. So it's AST and ALT are these liver enzymes. So I warned them ahead of time. I just got done working out. So it will not be shocking if I have a slight elevation of liver enzymes too. Please don't be alarmed.
Right.
So now the doctor comes in and goes, your liver enzymes are slightly elevated. I said, yes, ma'am.
There's an echo in here. I can tell.
Yeah. And they're not used to it. So, and so she said, well, we're just trying to be thorough. And I said, look, I'm in great health. I really am. And I said, this is a minor procedure. I said, I do understand going under at any time. That's the big risk when you go through one of these things. Right. And she said, we just want to make sure. I said, ma'am, there's no bad outcome here. She said, what? I said, there's no bad outcome. And she said, I don't understand. I said, there's never been a person who wants to live more than me or is more prepared to transition than me, all simultaneously. There's never been somebody more prepared. So any direction we go that day is going to be fine.
Mm.
She said, okay.
Well, that was outside of her experience. Talk about a different journey.
Yeah. She said, okay, well, I guess I get it. I said, it's okay. You don't need to get it. But I'm just saying, none of this is a big deal. I'm going to be fine.
That's funny.
Yeah. And she just clearly, I mean, as we were walking through it, I probably left it. That's maybe the weirdest man I've ever met.
But you got her thinking. You got her thinking.
Yeah. And I'm going to be fine. It's just a tiny little thing. But it's one of those things that, you know, I'm not walking in scared. I'm not walking in, you know, to me, it's just part of that day. My biggest concern is how many days do I have to miss the gym afterwards? That was my biggest concern. So, yeah. That was it.
These medical stories, I mean, they're always fascinating. Especially you've told a few medical stories that are quite on the edge of being humorous or even are humorous. And the reason I like that so much is because we as human beings tend to take medical situations really, really seriously.
Right.
And so whenever you can find a way to laugh at it, that's always healthy. But more than that, when you find a way to laugh at your own stuff, that's one of the steps, so to speak, in learning how to change the way you think about it and the way you respond to these different instances, these incidents that come along in life.
Yeah.
Deciding that you're going, okay, you know, things are going to happen. My response is, I'm fine with it. What do you mean?
Well, and people misunderstand that sometimes. So I always want to be clear. I plan on being here. I'm in perfect health. I want to be fine. All that's great. But I'm also truly not fearful of transitioning. I'm not. I never have been. It's you know, it's going to happen what's going to happen. And I'm not going to, you know, I just imagine I'm going to wake up there going, okay, let's do this again. You know, let's hit the road. I mean, I have this scenario painted how it's going to unfold already. So I got to gather a lot of information knowing I'm going to come back and forget it all again. But that's just probably what I've done 10,000 times. Again, that's what I believe. So none of this becomes scary. Once you realize that, none of this becomes scary anymore. And you're able to sort of operate on a different level of power when nothing like that is, you know, there's nothing to fear with all that.
I'm reminded of the show that we did a few episodes back where you talked about the time that you had the controlled psilocybin experience.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned that other people, and I knew this was true, other people who have gone through the psilocybin experience have found themselves shifting their views about life after death and so forth. From what you're saying, it sounds like if anything else, it kind of confirmed what you already believed, which is perhaps a little bit outside the norm. But it's a really interesting thing that so many people who do go through that experience end up in that same place of they're okay with it. Yeah. Everything's fine. What used to be a trauma is no longer a trauma.
The number one benefit they're finding, and maybe number one strong, but the psilocybin experiments have shown incredible progress or help for people that are dying from cancer in particular, or any condition that's fatal. The experiments are not curing them. The psilocybin can't do that. But the people that are worried about dying are reporting upwards of a 90%. They have this complicated formula they use. 90% improvement in the belief of, wow, I'm going to quit worrying about it. It's all right. We're good. You hear that a lot. I'm so scared to die. I would say, like, you know, I've been so scared to die that I'm not living what time I have left. Let's live what time I have left. When this happens, it's all going to be good, because you're exposed to that. You're exposed to and I never like to tell people what they would see in case they ever wanted to do that, but you said that perfectly. I wasn't given an epiphany. I was just giving a reinforcement. I was given reinforcement of, like, you know, I'm like, yeah, you got this, you understand this. And so that was cool. This is, I've never feared, you know, that transition. And right now, I mean, it's not anything I've never feared it. For a long time, I haven't feared it. and certainly don't fear it, now, especially now. So having these experiences when you realize it makes life it's not me wanting to die. It's me understanding I can live without the fear of dying.
Yes.
There's no fear of dying. And
That's huge.
that's such a powerful way to live.
It is. It is, because what that really means is you're going to be closer to what Abraham Hicks talked about for Esther Hicks. Abraham once said that Esther's plan is to live, die.
Yeah.
No decline, no massive disease or deteriorate. Just keep on going and going and going, and then you're done.
Yeah. That's my plan. And so you see that again. I'm not trying to alarm anyone, or I've had great conversations with my son, Justin, and my other son Chris about that no matter what, don't ever view that, because if this, at some point we are going to transition at some point. Right. And my thing is I want to squeeze all I can out of this and then jump right back into the other side. That's just with not miss a beat, and that's my goal. And
one of the coolest things I ever heard. I mean, different people have their own ways of expressing this. The similarities are the part that really get my attention from all the different stories I've heard. But one of the common themes, let's put it that way, that I hear is that when you die, there is no feeling of disconnect whatsoever. It's just one moment you're corporal form, and the next moment you're not.
Right.
And there's no loss of consciousness. There's no loss of awareness. There's no loss of identity other than the egoistic identity associated with the body. There's just continuity continues. It's really a fascinating thing.
But you can't kill energy, and you are energy. You can kill this physical, specimen that we have, this thing's holding it. But the energy itself is it's going to transition to just pure energy at that point. It's going to separate from the biological vessel that it's in, and you're just going to, okay, we're there. So it's not scary. But again, everybody has their own belief. Everybody has to get there on their own terms, how they want to see that. Anytime I've ever expressing my views, and I think you're aware of this, Walt, I'm not telling anyone how they should believe or they should stop believing. I'm just saying how I believe. And,
we share it there. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. And I know a lot of people believe I do, and I know a lot of people that don't believe I do. And I'm good all the way. My belief system is not built on needing anyone else to support it or understand it.
Yeah, right. It's not based on needing an approval or wanting to impose or anything like that. It's just
certainly. Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. Well, somehow, Joel, I guess I shouldn't be surprised. We took a non-topic and non-conversation and turned it into a show. That was pretty good.
It was, yeah. Some of those are fun too. Where you just simply start and let's see where it goes. We were all over the place, but we got some good stuff in today.
Well, actually, we weren't all that far all over the place, because, initially it was about how do you deal with loved ones who are dealing with stuff, and we covered a lot of aspects of that for a large portion of the show.
And then the rest of it,
there was a little bit of a tangent toward the end there, but I think we stayed close to a theme without having a theme. I'm still marveling at that. We do that all the times, but
we do. Yeah. Well, we probably stayed closer to the theme having no theme than days we have themes.
Now, if that doesn't bend your mind, nothing will.
Yes, I thought that would work for you. So, I want to let our audience know too, at least as far as I go, next week is my son's 18th birthday, and that's a really significant birthday for us for a lot of reasons. So I'm not going to be here next week, but we'll be here the following week.
And we'll wish Justin a happy birthday as well, and look forward to talking to you 2 weeks from now. So thank you, my friend. As usual, it's been great. And man, I can't wait to find out what the next one's going to be about.
All right. Have a good one, buddy.
All right. And we'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.